Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. The new optiscaler tool for DLSS, frame generation, and much more coming up on today's episode of 2020 Flight Simmers. Welcome back. Before we get started, I just want to apologize now because this tutorial is probably going to get a little bit confusing. But I'm going to try to simplify this as much as possible and answer as many questions throughout the way as I can. In today's video, I will go over the new optiscaler tool that can be found over on flightsim.to or their GitHub page. All of the links for today's video will be down below in the description. We will first go over the various download and installations, followed by a demo of the various settings inside of Microsoft Flight Sim 2024. Now, you may have picked up I said various download and installations, and that's because there may be some versions of this that might work for you and some that may not. The versions of the optiscaler tool that we're going to be going over today is version 7.0, which is a pre-release version that can be found on flightsim.to. We will also be going over version 6.7, and we will be taking a look at the DLSS enabler tool. I want to go over some of the similarities across all of these different versions. One, they will work with either AMD or Nvidia users. They will work with either monitor or VR, and they will work in either Microsoft 2020 or 2024. Some of the differences among these different versions are version 7.0 and 6.7 from the optiscaler GitHub page, links below. They can be used with DirectX 11 or DirectX 12. The DLSS enabler option can only be used with DirectX 12. Now, before we get into the download and installation, I felt it necessary to go over each of these options first, so this way you can just skip to the chapter section of the installation that you're going to need. So depending on the version of Microsoft Flight Simulator and depending on whether you're using DX11 or DX12, will dictate which one of these programs you can use. So the next question is, why would I want to use one over the other? The absolute first version that I would try is the one that is on the flightsim.to website. That's version 7.0, and that's going to give you the most options for adjustment. If this version does not work for you, meaning your sim will not boot up, then you need to revert to the next option, which would be version 6.7. However, in version 6.7, we are missing a couple features like frame generation. If you want frame generation, then we must use the DLSS enabler tool. Before I get ahead of myself, I need to go over some information about each of these tools, the optiscaler and the DLSS enabler. The main developers behind these tools kind of work in conjunction with each other. So the DLSS enabler tool also has the optiscaler tool built into it. So if I head over to the DLSS enabler website, you can see here that from the game, DLSS enabler outsources this to optiscaler and the frame gen mod that a lot of people have become accustomed with for those of you who are using a 20 series and 30 series graphics card. That is the other benefit of this application, that if you are using a 20 series, 30 series, or 40 series graphics card, you can enable frame generation on that card, as well as AMD users can take advantage of all of these same tools. Now, there are certain installation differences for AMD users versus Nvidia users, and I will get into that here shortly. The only other thing that we cannot use in VR with this application is frame generation. Sorry to get your hopes up with those of you who are in VR, but you cannot use the frame generation, but you can take advantage of all the other tools that are in this application. Now let's go over the download and installation process for each of the versions. I would recommend that everyone tries the version that is on flightsim.to first, as that is the latest version that is out, and it gives us the most options inside of the tool. This installation process will be the exact same for AMD and Nvidia users until I state otherwise. So the first thing that we need to do is to download the tool by clicking on the download, and that will download the optiscaler version 7.0 pre-release for Microsoft Flight Sim, and then you want to double click so that we can extract those files. We'll hit extract. These are all the files that are in the optiscaler version 7.0 tool made for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now what we need to do is to find the main folder for Microsoft Flight Simulator that contains the exe file. I'm only going to be able to show you where mine is. If yours is in a different location, post it down below in the comments section. Oh, and by the way, if you're getting value from the video, make sure you hit that subscribe, tick on that little bell, and smash the thumbs up button. It is greatly appreciated. For me, I need to go to my C drive. I'm going to go down to Xbox Games. And then Microsoft Flight Sim 2024 down to the content folder. Within this folder, you should find your Flight Sim 2024 exe. This is going to be the folder that we're going to be using throughout this entire tutorial video. Everything that we're going to put into Microsoft Flight Sim is going to go into this folder. For today's demonstration, I have created a mock-up folder of my Flight Simulator folder because I don't want to mess with any of these files here. So I'm going to open up my mockup folder. What we're going to be doing is copying all of these files and dragging them into our main folder for Microsoft Flight Sim. Before we do that, there is one change that we need to make. If you find AMD Fidelity FX DX12 file, you want to change the name of this to back. So erase the DLL and just type BAK. This is going to be a backup file. So if you want to revert back to default, you will be able to by just re-enabling this file by right-clicking, going down to rename, and then just changing the BAK to DLL. Now that we have done that, you can copy everything here, and then we're going to drag and drop it right into your main folder. For your transfer of documents, you should not have this populate. This is only popping up because I've already installed a lot of these files. So I'm just going to hit replace. Okay, so now that we have all of those files transferred, before we can move any farther, we need to make sure that we are using the latest version of the Nvidia DLL file for our simulator. For Nvidia users, I would highly recommend to use the DLSS swapper tool. Within this tool, we can update the DLSS version right from here. If you are unfamiliar with that tool, I will post links down below in the description for my tutorial on that. For AMD users, we're going to head over to the Tech Power Up website. Links will be down below for this, where you can download the Nvidia DLSS DLL file. For the AMD users, once you have downloaded the DLL file, you want to extract it and input it right into this folder. So you should now have this file nvngx_dlss.dll. The next thing that we need to do is to make a copy of this DLL file. So we're going to right click and then hit copy. I will then click on my desktop, right click, and then paste. What we're going to do here is change the name of this DLL file and erase everything except for nvngx.dll. Then you will take this file and copy it right back to your game folder. The next thing that everyone needs to do is to override the DLSS checks. So we're going to click on the DLSS overrides folder that we just installed, and then we're going to click on Enable Signature Override. This will be a registry edit to override any signature checks for the NVIDIA driver or DLL file. You just want to hit yes through all the prompts, and then you're good to go. When you want to revert back to default, you will just tick on Disable Signature Override. I'll go over a little more on that a little bit later. At this point, for all the NVIDIA users, you are all set to go to try it out on Microsoft Flight Simulator. You can now open the sim and see if it will boot up for you. If it does boot up for you, perfect. skip to the chapter section where I go over all of the settings, and you're good to go for that. For all of the AMD users, there are two more files that we need to install into our flight sim folder. If we go over to the optiscaler GitHub page, we're going to scroll down to where you get to GPU spoofing options. Click there, and now we're going to scroll down to where it says Fakeapi, and we're going to left click that. Then you're going to go to the latest version. Currently, we're on version 1.2, and you're going to click on the first download to download the Fakeapi zip files. Once you have downloaded the zip file, you should have Fakeapi zip. You want to then extract that, and you'll be left with the Fakeapi folder. We'll double click, and these two files we need to copy and drag into the main folder for Microsoft Flight Simulator. And that's it. Now all of the AMD users are set and ready to go. Spawn into Microsoft Flight Sim, and if it boots up, you are good to go to the chapter section that we go over all of the various settings. If you're one of the unlucky ones that version 7.0 does not work for you, now we have two other options that we can install the optiscaler program. We can either use version 6.7 or we can install it using the DLSS enabler. Now again, this is going to highly depend on whether you're using DX11 or you're using DX12. If you're using DX11, then the only option that you have is version 6.7. If you're using DX12 or Flight Sim 2024, then I would recommend to use the DLSS enabler. The reason for that is if you're using version 6.7, you will not have a frame generation option available to you. However, if you use the DLSS enabler, you will have a frame generation option available to you. So now let's go over the download and installation process for version 6.7. Over on the Optiscaler website, we're going to head over to Releases, and we're going to tick on Latest. Now there are some changes with this installation versus the previous installation, so it's going to be important that you follow along here. We're now going to click on the optiscaler zip file at the bottom and download that. Once you have that downloaded, you're going to find the zip file and extract that. And again, for this demonstration, I'm going to be using the mockup folder that I've created for Flight Sim 2024. Before we copy any of these files into our Flight Sim folder, there's one change that we need to make. We're going to find the nvngx.dll file, highlight, right-click, and then we're going to rename this file dxgi. There is one change that we need to make. If you find AMD Fidelity FX DX12 file, you want to change the name of this to back. So erase the DLL and just type BAK. This is going to be a backup file. So if you want to revert back to default, we can now copy all of these files and then drag and drop them right into our Microsoft Flight Simulator file folder. Now that we have done that, again, we're going to double click on the DLSS overrides and we're going to enable the signature override. Once that is complete, we need to make sure that we have the latest updated DLL file for DLSS. Again, we can either use the DLSS swapper tool. For those of you who are Nvidia users, this is a great tool. And if you are using AMD, you can head over to Tech PowerUp, download that file, and then extract it into the Microsoft Flight Sim folder. You should now have the nvngx.dlss DLL file in your Microsoft Flight Sim folder. What we want to do here is highlight, right-click, and we're going to copy. We're going to place this copy on our desktop by clicking on the desktop, right-click, and paste. Now we need to change the name of this file. All we need to do is to delete everything except for nvngx.dll, and then we're going to drag that back into our Microsoft Flight Simulator main folder. For all the Nvidia users, that's all that we need to do. You can now load into the sim and it should boot up now with using this version. For all the AMD users, we now need to install the two other files for the Fake API. So we're going to head over to the optiscaler GitHub, scroll down again, and then we're going to go to GPU spoofing options. We're going to click on Fake API and download the zip file. Once you have that file downloaded, you want to extract that Fake API, and you will now have the folder here. We can double click, and you will highlight both of these and drag both of these into your main game folder. Now, for all the AMD users, you are all set to go, and now you can spawn into the sim and try out your new settings. Before I go over the DLSS enabler installation, I want to go over another option that you have when you're using the optiscaler tool from either the GitHub or the flightsim.to website. And that is anyone that is using ReShaders that is using a DXGI DLL file, you can use those with the optiscaler tool. You cannot use those when you're using the DLSS enabler mod. So that's why I want to go over this now. For those of you who are using ReShaders, what you need to do is to create a new folder, and you're going to name it plugins. Now you will open this folder and install all of your ReShader files in here, as well as the DXGI file, just like it shows right here. The last thing I want to show you regarding the optiscaler tool is the uninstallation process. All of the instructions are right here on the optiscaler GitHub. Now, for those of you who version 7.0 does not work for, and you are using DX12, the DLSS enabler option is going to be the fastest installation of all of these. So you want to head over to the Nexus Mods website, links down below, and you do need to create an account. There's no credit cards or anything. Just create an account so that you can download this mod. Then we're going to head over to Files, and then you want to select the latest mod, and then click Download. Select Slow Download and allow it to download the installation exe file. In your Downloads folder, or wherever you have downloaded that file, you will now see DLSS Enabler version 3.02 installer exe. So now all we need to do is to run the installer. And again, this is for AMD and Nvidia users. So we're just going to double click, hit accept, and then we're going to hit next. Next again. And now we need to select the game folder that contains the exe file for the sim. That's where mine is. I'm going to hit OK, and then we'll hit next. Now, for today's demonstration, I'm not going to be installing it in this folder. We're going to use my mockup folder. Now, we'll hit next. This is going to give us some installation options. What we want to tick here is install as a DXGI file. And you want to install the registry files to enable and disable the driver signature checks. This is all you need to check if you are an Nvidia user. If you are an AMD user, meaning AMD GPU, then you also need to tick on Enable Support for AMD and Intel GPUs. Once you have done that, you can then hit Next. I am not going to do that because I do not have AMD, so I'll deselect, hit Next. Within this, we'll show all of the files or components that is going to be installed. You will see here it is installing Optiscaler version 6. So the version of Optiscaler that comes with the DLSS enabler is a little bit older. But don't worry, we're going to go over how to update that here in just a moment. The other thing that you do not see here is the DLSS DLL file for Nvidia. So we will need to do that as well. In any case, once we're here, we need to hit install, and it will install all the files for us, and then we'll tick finish. Now that we have the DLSS enabler installed, we need to make sure that we have the updated DLSS DLL file for Nvidia. Again, we can use the DLSS swapper tool to do that, or we can head over to the Tech Power Up website and download the file manually. Just download the zip file and then extract it directly into your main game folder. The next thing that we need to do is to update the optiscaler version that is within the DLSS enabler tool. To do that, we are going to head over to the optiscaler GitHub and we're going to go down to latest. We're going to download the latest version, version 6.7, by clicking on the zip file. Now, the reason why I am not downloading version 7.0 is because I already know version 7.0 crashes when I go to run that on my system. So you will extract the optiscaler version 6.7. Once you have downloaded version 6.7 optiscaler, we're going to change the NVN GX DLL file. So you'll highlight this file, right click, and then we're going to rename. We are going to rename this file DLSS-enabler-upscaler.dll, and that's it. You want this file to read exactly as this file does right here. Now all we need to do is we're going to take this file from the optiscaler folder and we're going to drag it into our Microsoft Flight Sim folder, and it will override the DLSS enabler upscaler DLL file. You have now updated the optiscaler version within the DLSS enabler tool. Within the files of the DLSS enabler tool, we also have the disable Nvidia signature check, and we have the restore Nvidia signature check. You want to make sure that you also click the disable Nvidia signature checks for the registry, and then click yes through all of that. And with that, you are pretty much all set to go. For the AMD users and Nvidia users, we're done. You've got everything set up here. Now, if you want to uninstall the application, you need to scroll down. You need to restore the Nvidia signature check, and then you'll go down to uninstall, and it will uninstall all the files for us inside of our Microsoft Flight Sim folder. Okay, so now that we have gone through all three installation procedures, now let's hop into the sim and I will show you all of the settings in action. The other thing that may help out performance is to go into your Windows game mode setting and turn game mode on. From within this setting menu, we can also click on graphics settings. It may also help if you turn on Hags or hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. For my system, you can see here that I am not using Hags, and as I will show you here in a moment, frame generation works fine on my system. The first thing that we need to do to be able to use any of the settings is we need to make sure that we're in NVIDIA DLSS mode. If you're an AMD user, you want to make sure that you tick on NVIDIA DLSS and then hit save. Now that we're back in the cockpit, to bring up the DLSS menu, we're going to hit the insert key on your keyboard. For this, I'm going to zoom in on the G1000 and we're going to test some of these settings. All right, with the FPS tool on the right, this will allow us to see any VRAM usage as well as any FPS drops or other latency issues. So let's go over the optiscaler tool. Again, I'm using version 6.7 as you see here in the top left. If you're using version 7.0, you will have a couple extra options, which I will go over here in a moment. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is the upscaling method. Currently, we are set on DLSS. I'm going to set this to FSR3.x. I want everyone to keep a good eye on the glass panels and see if there is any change. Now, I don't know if you can notice that, but the resolution on that panel looks much, much sharper now that we had switched to the FSR3.x. When you change these, you need to make sure that you hit apply and you'll be good to go. Also, most of these settings that we're going to go over are change on the fly settings, so you can see real time what the difference in performance and clarity is going to make. Below this, we have FSR setting. I leave this set on 3.1, which is the latest upscaler. We have a couple settings here. I don't mess with any of these. Below this, we have RCast settings, and this is a sharpening filter. I don't seem to need this for Microsoft Flight Simulator, but you can enable this as well as motion adaptive sharpening so that when you're turning around in the cockpit or externally, that it adds some sharpening to the image so it doesn't blur it out for you. But again, I didn't really need to use this feature. If you do, let me know how it worked out for you in the comments. Below this, we have the DLSS enabler option. Now, if you're someone who has downloaded the version from flightsim.to, you will not have the DLSS enabler option. Within this menu, this allows us to limit our FPS, hit apply, and as you can see the FPS tool, we can also use this as a dynamic frame generation with an FPS limit. So if we just hover over dynamic frame gen, it will enable frame gen only when the FPS will go below an FPS limit that you have set. The other thing we can do here is use a dynamic frame gen without an FPS limit. So if we take notice of the FPS counter, our main thread is just about 20 milliseconds at 50 FPS. If we tick on dynamic frame gen, we've only gained 6 or 7 FPS, but look at the main thread. To get the full functionality of the frame generation option, simply clicking dynamic frame generation won't do everything for us. So what we need to do is to hit the insert key to remove the tool, and then we're going to hit escape and go back into our settings. In the settings, you want to make sure that you tick on the Nvidia DLSS frame generation option, and now we can go back into the sim. Now, as you can see, our FPS has increased significantly from what we had just prior. The other thing that I would like to note here is you must also keep the dynamic frame generation ticked, because if you don't, watch the main thread. It shoots right back up into the 20s. Even though the FPS didn't decrease any, it still caused more latency on our main thread. So just make sure that you keep the dynamic frame generation ticked as well as the frame gen option inside Microsoft Flight Simulator. I've also done a video on how to balance out your latency for Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. I'll also post a link down below in the description for that. The next option that we're going to take a look at is output scaling. With output scaling, this will upscale the image internally before it is sent to your monitor, and then it is rescaled to your monitor's resolution or to your VR headset resolution. There are some caveats when you're using this though, so let me show you. This is really going to help with things that are out in the distance, so I could really see how this can be helpful with VR. So we're going to enable the tool. I'm going to set it just about at 1 and we'll hit apply. So we're scaling pretty much to the monitor's resolution. There's a couple things that I want everyone to look out for here. One, I want you to look for the clarity of the grass out in the field. I also want you to look for the GPU VRAM that's going to be used. And we're also going to take notice of the FPS that we're getting in the top. So there's a bunch of stuff here we're going to take a look at, but it's really important. We're going to turn it up to 300% and hit apply. Now, I'm not sure if you could see, but when you hit apply, everything kind of goes blurry for a second and then really sharpens up out there in the distance. However, if we take a look over at the FPS counter, the FPS did drop about 3 FPS, but more importantly, the GPU VRAM. We went from, well, let's turn it off. So we're at 7.8. With the output scaling off, we're only at 6 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, this is greatly going to change. So let me show you here. Let's point over towards these buildings. We're at 6 gig of VRAM. We're going to turn the output scaling on, and we're going to hit apply. Look at that. We just jumped from 6 gig of VRAM to 8 gig of VRAM. So for my suggestion with output scaling If you do not have a GPU with enough VRAM, you're going to wind up most likely having a crash or very low FPS, a bunch of stutters. So, this is something that you're going to have to play with. Now, if you have a 4090 GPU, then you could use this in VR and turn up the output scaling to 1.5 or 2, and you should have plenty of VRAM to deal with there in VR. I tried it with my 4080, and I'm glad it didn't go kaput on me. So just be careful with output scaling. And whenever you make a change on output scaling, just make sure that you hit apply change. I also want to test this out on the glass cockpit. So with it disabled, this is what it looks like. Now we're going to enable it with 3 times resolution. As far as the glass panel resolution, it doesn't look like it enhanced much with the glass panels. Now let's head up to the right-hand side of the tool, and here's where we can adjust sharpness levels. In the simulator itself, if we hit escape and we go to our settings, we have the option to adjust the AMD Fidelity FX sharpening. So this is one way of adjusting our sharpening, but that may not do enough or the right type of sharpening that you're looking for. When you mess around with it, you'll see what I'm talking about here. So in the sharpening section, if we tick on override, again, these are live. So as soon as you tick on it, you're going to see a difference. So this is without the sharpening. And now that's with sharpening. And you can tell a big difference on the numbers here. Let's do it one more time. Take a look at the blurriness around the numbers. And now that blurriness has gone. So this sharpening factor, I feel, will really, really help in VR. Bring up the tool. Let's turn off the sharpening. Turn it back on. And you can definitely see much more detail in all the grass when you turn on the sharpening. Now, you may not want to have it at 1. I usually keep my sharpening right around 0.7, and that seems to be just fine. Below this, we have upscaling ratio. The ratio override or upscaling will allow us to override any of the quality levels that we have here below by a certain ratio. In my personal opinion, if you're going to do that, you may as well just tick on the quality override and then adjust the quality levels to what you want. Below this, we have some dynamic resolution scaling. I don't mess with any of this. Below this, we have some flags. So we have auto exposure and HDR. Now, I've tested both of these in the sim here, and it doesn't look like it does any difference. Below all of this, we have some advanced settings that we can show here below. In the advanced settings category, down on the lower left, we have some MIP map bias for DirectX. We hover over here, this will help with blurry textures in broken games. Could you say Microsoft Flight Sim is broken or not broken? You let me know. Negative values will make textures sharper, while positive values will make them more blurry. So, how do you know what to select here? Well, they've given us a tool so we can click on Calculate MIP Map Bias, and then we can select the DLSS quality level that we're using. It will then populate a bias level. We hit Use Value. It automatically populates it there. We can hit Set, and it will now set that target for the next time we change the DLSS quality level. So yes, with this particular setting, this is not an on-the-fly setting, but we don't have to exit the sim. To get this setting to take effect, all you need to do is to go into Microsoft, hit Escape, go to Settings, switch your DLSS setting, save it again, and go back to my DLAA. And now, if we take a look at the MIP-map bias, the current is exactly what we have it set to. So that's all you need to do for this setting to take effect. Below this is an option for anisotropic filtering. So yes, we can force anisotropic filtering levels right from this tool directly. Again, you will need to change your DLSS quality level for the filtering to take effect. While enabling the advanced settings, we also got a couple more settings in the flag section. We have jitter cancellation, but this is only going to be for games that send motion data with a pre-applied jitter to them. So I'm not sure if Microsoft Flight Simulator falls into that category, but let me know down below if you're using this setting here. All right, so that is pretty much all of the settings in version 6.7. For those of you who are fortunate enough to be able to use version 7.0, remember, you will not have the DLSS enabler section. You will have a frame generation section at the top. So for this, you will just tick on frame gen and FG HUD fix, and that will enable your frame generation in your version. Once you have made all of your changes in the application, at the very bottom, you want to make sure that you tick on Save INI. And this will save all of our settings to the INI file, so you don't have to change these every time you spawn into the sim. Now, for the astute, you may have noticed one thing that this application does not allow us to change, and that is the presets for the various quality levels. And I'm talking about preset E and preset F. This is also another very important part of DLSS to get the very best picture quality and the least amount of ghosting possible is to enable preset E or preset F. Personally, I choose preset F. I feel that gives me the best quality in DLSS. The best way to enable or disable the various presets for DLSS quality levels is to use the Nvidia Profile Inspector. If you're unfamiliar with the Nvidia Profile Inspector, I've done a video on that. I'll post down below in the description. Once in the Nvidia Profile Inspector, at the very top, we're just going to type in Microsoft and then flight, and then we're going to find Microsoft Flight Simulator. I also want to preface this by saying if you don't know what you're doing inside of this tool, please do not do it, because this offers so many more options of messing up your GPU that if you don't know what you're doing, it's just best not to do it. In the DLSS section of the Profile Inspector, in the Force DLSS presets, we can force a preset across all DLSS quality levels. For me, I choose preset F and then hit apply. You want to make sure that you do not check any of these other force scaling ratio or forcing DLAA, because you are going to do all of your scaling within Microsoft Flight Simulator while using the DLSS optiscaler tool. All right, folks, that's it for today's video. I hope I was able to answer as many questions as possible. If you do have any other questions, post them down below in the comments section and I'll get right back with you. If you found value in today's content, make sure to hit that subscribe, tick on that little bell, and smash that thumbs up button. To all of my Flight Simmer friends around the world, keep the blue side up, and we will see you on the next one. Thanks for watching, everybody.